Welcome, everybody, to episode 11 of season 2 of Crossing the Line with Greg Heym. It's wonderful to be here today. Today's March 24th, also known as National Cocktail Day. It's also National Cheesesteak Day, but nobody likes Philly, so we're not talking about that.
No.
Do you have a preferred cocktail?
I'm not really a drinker, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But, you know, when I do have a drink, it'll be
Shirley Temple? No.
Love a good Shirley Temple.
I'm sure you do.
But no, I'm pretty simple. Like tequila soda.
Okay.
Like
What are you going for, Ray? You getting a cocktail? A vegan colada?
7-7.
7-7. What'd you just watch Saturday Night Fever? That's what they all. All right, Lena, what are you going for?
Gin and soda with lime.
Gin and soda. Okay. I'm not a big cocktail guy. Scotch. Just give me a glass of Macallan 12 on the rocks, and that's it.
Oh, wow.
Well, pitch it. No. But and we are joined by Scott Nadler from CrossCountry Mortgage. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. How are you? Do we need to rip the Band-Aid off right now?
Yeah, usually we talk about our weekends, and Saturday was not so great. St. John's threw up a stinker, as we used to say.
High expectations, and they did not come through.
Well, in fairness, Patino always said that we can beat anybody, we can lose to anybody, because as poor as they shoot, which is terrible, if it gets bad enough, which it did on Saturday, and you shoot, I think it was 2 for 22 from three-point range. Not that Arkansas shot much better. They didn't, which is why St. John's was in the game with only a couple minutes left. But the big story was R.J. Lewis and how poorly he played and how bad he shot. They didn't make the adjustments they tend to make, or at least they didn't listen to the coach. They should have been kicking out balls because the driving was not working because they were packing in.
Right.
It's like when people used to do it against the Jets when they knew Curtis Martin was getting the football every time. You put like 10 in the box and you don't worry about getting beat deep. And I think they were doing that, challenging them to shoot. And they couldn't make adjustments like they did in other games.
Zuby's a beast. He played great.
Zuby played great. They shot well from the foul line. But the foul trouble that Kadari Richmond got into and Sim Welcher.
That was tough.
Welcher, it was bad. Not having an outside shooter who could have feasted. And the scariest thing ever, there was only 5 assists for the whole team. I don't know how that happens.
Lewis Jr. was the biggest disappointment.
And he'd be the first to say it. I think he owned up to it.
But it's less about the shooting and more about the effort and the attitude. Those are two things you can control. And you could just see it. His body language was off. I'm not a body language doctor over here, but you can see that just his overall demeanor was off. You could feel it. And I think Patino got some criticism, I think, for benching him late in the game, but I don't think he had a choice.
He didn't have a choice. The shot selection was atrocious, too. He just kept trying to force it. And it's funny, he got taken out right after he hit a couple of free throws.
Yeah.
But I think he was trying to send a message, like, you play the way I'm telling you to play.
Right.
And if you remember, they lost the Villanova game because instead of running the play that Patino called, Lewis decided to take the shot. And it wasn't designed for him. And if you watch the series on Vice, he goes into this. And coaches don't like that.
Now, if Patino wore the white suit, do you think we'd see a different outcome?
Yes. Because you can't stop looking at the white suit. The players would have been distracted.
Be very distracted. Yeah.
Look, it was a great season. It was great to see, them being a legitimate contender, winning the Big East. Now let's hear Zuby will be back. I would think Lewis might be back because he didn't really stun anybody in the big games. And I think, people want to play for Patino. Especially with exposure. The Garden is sold out when they play.
St. John's is definitely back.
They're back. Problem is,
you initially put them on the map, and now Patino is.
Well, it's all about the pep band. I was in the pep band, and people mock that until they find out they give you scholarships for that. So it's a lot cooler than the baseball team used to get mad. We got the same scholarships they did, and I said, "We're better than you."
You are.
Well, they did have some guys that went there. Some guy named John Franco and Frank Viola were St. John's guys.
Yeah.
So
and the guys in the band don't need rotator cuff surgery or anything. So.
I mean, I had my shoulder repaired, but
that was years later.
Yes, there's just years of holding the trumpet up. And no, I always joke that in '92 we got eliminated in the first round by Tulane in the Omni in Atlanta. I packed the trumpet up and really didn't take it out until my son was born, I think, because I just stopped playing. Like a lot of people, I did something in college, and then I just.
So that game was the last time that you played?
I would try to show my son. I wasn't going to let him use my trumpet right away, so I got him a cheaper trumpet. So I tried to teach him some things, but he would not listen.
And let's go to the tape from the 92 game against Tulane.
It was just, you see the sour note I hit. No, but anyhow, it was bad. But you just saying, it's like, wow, the game's close at halftime. This is just what they did against Creighton in the Big East Championship and so often during the year. And you can't just always count. And you talk about body language. When A-Rod used to go through his struggles in the playoffs, and he always had that look on his face. I used to say, oh, great, he has A-Rod face. Like A-Rod had that look like there was nothing going on in his mind and he was completely psyched out. And I think Lewis had that kind of look, like he couldn't understand how he could be doing this poorly and then he'd be able to get it back. And Kobe used to do this too. The way you get it back is you just shoot more.
Correct.
And the reference to John Starks in Game 7 in 94 is around when he was like 2 for 18. Yeah. But Riley didn't take him out.
Right.
You just hope he hits.
Correct.
Right? The law of averages.
They were close also in that game. I will say, though, the tournament is always good. The formula for the tournament, it always works. I think gambling is way up this year compared to where it was last year.
Well, because it's also way legal everywhere now.
So I was at a sports bar on Friday night, and a friend of mine owns this bar in Chelsea, and there was a group of like 20-year-olds. And what they did on every game was they bet which team's going to get to 15 points first. So you would hear these outbursts, these roars in the bar based on nothing, right? So finally we caught on. We went over to them. We're like, what are you guys yelling about? They're like, we're just betting on every game which team gets the 15 points first. So the first, typically the first 3-4 minutes of a game is not that exciting. Right. And they made it super exciting. Well,
gambling can make it. I am against legalized gambling. I think it's a terrible thing. A buddy of mine, we're eating.
You think it's terrible for who?
I think it's terrible. Gambling is something that a lot of people cannot do responsibly. And it is, there's even commercials now that warn people not to threaten athletes that cause you to lose bets.
For sure.
You think about it. I just don't think it's something we need to be forcing on people. And that's why, and I like to gamble, but I will not download any of those apps.
Yeah.
Because I don't trust myself to we could be betting right now while we're here.
It's true.
Who's betting on crossing the line with Greg Heym right now? I don't know. Ray, you're not betting on it. Come on.
At what point will Greg start talking about the Jets? That's what people are betting on.
No, we're just going to pretend they don't exist because I'm not expecting. I do like the signing of Justin Fields. Based on what was out there, clearly was the best they could get.
All right, so if someone I can't see the clock, but if someone had whatever 6 minutes in, they won the bet.
You brought it up, buddy. All right, we're coming to you, as always, from our home here in Studio 1873, located conveniently right outside my office. All right, we'll be back with the news of last week. But before we do that, we have a message from CrossCountry Mortgage.
Your dream home is closer than you think. I'm Scott Nadler, VP of Mortgage Lending at CrossCountry Mortgage, and I'm here to get you the perfect loan to match your perfect home. From first-time home buyers to seasoned homeowners, I've helped clients make their moves with confidence. Ready for a smooth, stress-free home buying experience? Let's get you moving today. Call me and let's turn those dreams into keys.
Hey, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. As an official moving partner of Brown Harris Stevens, we know that your clients deserve more than just a move. At Roadway Moving and Storage, we turn moving into an experience they will love. From specialized services to a white glove treatment, we've got it all covered. When you choose Roadway, you're choosing a peace of mind for your clients. Plus, our referral program is the most rewarding in the industry. Want to learn more? Shoot me an email at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
All right, and we're back. Gee, that guy looks a lot like you, but he doesn't have that scruffy beard you got going on. That guy was clean shaven. What happened?
I was tired of my face. So I had to grow out the beard.
I don't even see it that often. I try not to look in the mirror. That's a good thing about having no hair. I don't have to look in the mirror in the morning.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So even though retail sales came out, that was on Monday, so we covered that on Monday's podcast, but it came in lower than expected, barely positive, which was bad considering the January data was revised downward even further. So
significantly,
you're coming off of like a 1.2% decline, and the best you could do is a 0.2% gain. That's pretty bad. But that kind of ties into what we're going to talk about now. The Fed had a meeting. We knew they weren't going to touch rates. That was the given. But 4 times a year they put out their economic projections, and these are news. Although the PDF of it's funny. It looks like it was done on a 1930s manual typewriter, but that's the Federal Reserve for you. So again, no changes to, I word the statement a little different, but who cares? We knew they weren't going to touch rates because, and they themselves have now said, like, we can't really do anything until we know what's going on with tariffs. And we're going to talk about tariffs and inflation for the 50th time on the show in a little bit.
Austin Goolsbee had some interesting comments about tariffs, which we could talk about.
What did he say? He's a former Fed governor.
He was saying how imports themselves only account for 11% of the GDP. And it's not like tariffs aren't all imports. So he said any impact would be transitory, which you don't like a Fed member using the word transitory.
Okay, well, we're gonna get to that in a minute too, because I made that point in the blog. So they lowered their GDP.
I'm just teasing it.
They lowered their GDP forecast for the next 3 years, 25, 26, and 27. And they're expecting, and this is from the Fed themselves, they're expecting growth under 2% each year. Mm-hmm. They're not predicting a recession, but nobody ever predicts a recession in these things. You just look at anybody's projections over years. And they raised the inflation projections for this year and next year. But again,
that was really tariffs though, right?
They keep saying that we can't really touch rates till we know what's going on with tariffs and what the impact's going to be. In their dot plot, which is basically they asked them where they expect rates to finish the year.
That was interesting.
They're basically mostly in agreement with one exception on 2 cuts this year for a total of 0.5%, which probably would be in the second half of the year.
But from December to now, the big change was how many Fed members were expecting zero rate cuts this year. Right. So I think the first in December was 1, and now it's 4.
Well, you look at inflation being stubborn to come down. The percent of cuts that they gave in the second half of last year are going to start to, impact the economy a lot more in the coming months. So what are they in a rush for anyway? So, they cut rates, I thought, way too soon. Mm-hmm. I never thought anybody would be cutting rates when unemployment was so low when we were adding so many jobs. So the question is, when will they reach this 2% target? And they're holding firm that it's 2027, which is almost 3 years from now when you think about it, right? But who knows? It's an arbitrary number. They don't have to obviously get there to wait to cut rates because they've already started. Mm-hmm. It's more of a dynamic target. As long as they get close, it's like horseshoes or hand grenades, as they used to say in the old days.
I was getting a lot of I wouldn't say a lot. I got a few phone calls from agents who were telling me that they had clients who were waiting for this announcement to see if they were going to make a decision on whether they were going to proceed with a purchase or proceed with an offer.
Right.
And it's the same thing that you and I have been talking about. The Fed rate decision indirectly would impact mortgage rates, but it's not directly impacting it. So whether the Fed, and I think for this one specifically, it was pretty certain that they weren't going to do anything. But I think it's really important for people to understand that, the Fed rate decision, if you're a home buyer out there, you shouldn't be basing your decision on what the Fed is doing right now.
It depends what Chairman Powell may or may not say at his press conference, or what might
way more important
in the economic projections. Obviously, these would say that you would think these would push mortgage rates a little bit higher because even though growth is lower, they're raising their inflation projections. And then, of course, in his press conference, he was asked, Jerome Powell was asked about the impact of tariffs on prices and used that word transitory, right? And look, you're not tariffing.
There's a history there with that word.
Yes, we hope he would never use this again after he completely botched, things when the whole world except him knew that inflation was raging and was not going to go away because you had increased the money supply by 40%. So the joke was he had retired the word transitory, and now he's brought it back.
Yeah,
like bell-bottom jeans or something like that, right? I don't know what he's thinking. Just saying the word transitory is bad. He was wrong then.
Yeah.
Actually, in this case, I think he's still wrong, but for different reasons.
He wants to redeem himself, maybe.
No, he's trying to bring the word back and make people forget, or make it sound like it's a dual-purpose word that he can use it, more than once, and maybe get rid of the.
But I think people did forget, and now they're kind of.
I never forgot because I'm never going to forgive
people
them
in the general public. It's like what do they call it? The Barbra Streisand effect. Have you heard that before?
No, I think I would remember if I heard a Barbra Streisand effect.
There was a tabloid magazine who had no subscribers, and they took a picture of her home, and she made a big deal about it and tried to sue them. And because of the big deal that she was making about it, it shed more of a light on her home, and then that got published everywhere. So if she didn't say anything, no one would really care, even know that it existed.
Right.
So it's like her just highlighting it. So it's called the Barbra Streisand effect,
Well, there's no such thing as bad press, as they always say.
I guess.
Uh,
That's what we say here at
Yes,
Crossing
we'll take
Line.
all the press we can get. So, with this whole tariff and inflation thing, clearly a tariff raises the price of the item being tariffed. Potentially. We've gone over this a million times. Sometimes the producer can absorb the whole cost of the tariff. If the good isn't something that's hard to get, you'll get it from somewhere else, so you won't pay more for it. The dollar gets stronger versus that currency, the price will go down just because of that. So this idea that there's this one-to-one relationship, and again, if Scott Nadler is buying, whatever, and he's paying more for that one item, he has less money to spend on the other items.
True.
But when you increase the money supply by 40%, hello, Fed, you should realize that's what really creates serious inflation. Too much money chasing not enough goods. This isn't a too much money situation. I don't feel like I have too much money. Anybody else feel like they got too much money? No, right? So send your money to...
Lena is shaking her head yes. So.
All right, so this will make you want to think of something else. The probability of recession is now at 36%. And you go, wait, what? 36? That sounds pretty high. Well, CNBC has this thing called the Fed survey. They're not surveying the Fed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they call it the Fed. But the chances of recession were only 23% in January, and now they're 36% now. They survey fund managers. Did I say fund managers? There's nothing fun about it. Strategists and analysts. They don't say economists, but maybe they're lumping them in as analysts. And of course, the reason for the increased chance is tariffs. Mm-hmm. Tariffs.
So, one thing that I wanted to say is a little behind the curtain here. Greg will send me articles to read, typically at 11:30 at night before our Monday podcast. So I've got a couple of minutes just.
First of all, I'm never up at 11:30, so that I can have a lot of people vouch for that.
But we're just kind of getting a sense of different things that we want to talk about. If you look at the language that these writers are using in these articles, from unprecedented, historic, never before seen, it's if it bleeds, it leads. That's still kind of the motto of media. And it's a lot of fear mongering that is out there. Nothing that's happening right now is unprecedented. Yes, we have a polarizing administration. People have strong opinions about what's happening. Either you love what's happening, you despise what's happening. I'd say most people are probably somewhere in the middle. There's some good things. There's some
and by
bad
the way,
things.
there's nothing surprising about what's happening. All this stuff was promised during the contest, and none of it is shocking.
Right.
I maybe the speed at which it's happening or the amounts of the tariffs.
Also not as shocking considering midterm whatever
contests
are around the corner. So but again, as I'm reading these articles and you're seeing it, it's such hyperbolic language that I think people need to take a step back, pump the brakes a little bit, and take everything with a grain of salt.
Well, it's funny because in this survey, over 70% of the respondents believe tariffs are bad for inflation, jobs, and growth. Well, that's funny because they weren't so bad for most of those things for the prior 8 years, right? When we had a bunch of tariffs in the first version of the current administration, which were basically all kept in the next administration. So what's changed? Well, I mean, clearly anybody who studied economics knows that the inflation that we're trying to get out of now was not caused by tariffs, even though there were plenty of them. It was caused by stupid money printing.
Printing a lot of money.
That 40%, you increase the money supply by 40%, you're going to have runaway inflation. The supply chain stuff did get worked out and is not the problem anymore. The problem is a lot of that money is still out there. The money supply is decreased a little bit, but not by 40%. And that's why it's been so hard to get it down. But over the weekend, little leaks about how a lot of these may not be implemented at all, which I've said from the beginning. remember, there's 3 reasons for tariffs. One is to raise revenue, which we certainly need. 2 is to protect American businesses and jobs here. And the third one is as a negotiating tactic. Give me what I want or I'm going to do this to you. And then everything you're tariffing us on, we'll tariff you. So there's talks. The U.S. will have talks with the EU and India, and I'm sure talking to all these other countries for what's April 2nd, the reciprocal tariff day, or whatever you want to call it.
Liberation Day, I think.
Liberation Day, they're calling it, but I would call it reciprocal tariff day.
Yeah.
And we'll see. Now, that being said, after being asked incessantly, both the president and the Treasury Secretary have said we can't rule out a recession. Mm-hmm. If your primary function, it's like fighting inflation. We always talk about Paul Volcker in the early 80s had to cause a recession because it was the only way to get rid of the inflation. And you're better in the long term for that. Now, if they think that the trade climate is unfair to the United States and they want to make changes or at least treat every country the way they're treated, that could cause some pain initially. There's no question. But they'll say they're playing a long-term game, and you get past the noise.
Right.
I always say that like most of the worst things you ever haven't predicted don't happen.
Right.
Snowstorms, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we hear it all the time. This is going to cause a recession. We heard a lot of that, the first version of this administration, and it didn't happen, and inflation was under 2%. So I don't know why nobody's looking back at history. Well, these are different these times. No, they haven't been, most of them have not been enacted yet. So save your dire predictions and you're scaring the what out of people for when it actually happens. So they've dropped their forecasts for GDP growth this year to 1.7 from 2.4%. But if you want to be really scared, look at the current GDP now forecast. Remember, it's got to be GDP now because nobody cares about GDP later. They're looking at first quarter economic contraction or negative growth of 1.8%. Again, a lot of that has to do with net exports.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of stuff flood in here, unprecedented trade balances at the beginning of the year. But maybe more seriously, we've seen consumer sentiment hit a 2-year low. We've seen very weak retail sales. So we could have a negative growth quarter. We'll see. Now that we have 2 months of consumer spending, and on Friday we'll get the PCE, and that's the final word on prices and spending.
We have 2 big Fridays coming up. You got the PCE this Friday, and then the jobs numbers next Friday. So those will be very telling as well.
Better be on our game for those.
We got to be. Are we ever not?
No, people always say, bring your A game, Greg. I'm like, I don't have B game. I love it.
You were born ready. Going back to the Fed for a second, the other big announcement with the Fed was them reinvesting bond holdings back into the market, which I think is another thing that it's a de facto rate cut that in essence can bring mortgage rates down. And the best way that I can explain this to people is if there's a band that you love. What was the band that you were just talking about before? What was I talking about before?
No, we were talking about Graham Parsons. We were talking about the Birds.
Oh, okay.
But don't listen to Ray. Ray's got their weird taste.
Let's say there's a band out there that most people like you're a Swiftie, I know. So let's say Taylor Swift is selling, her tickets. They sell 1,000 tickets, and every time Taylor Swift announces that she has a concert, Greg Heym buys 300 of those tickets. So naturally now,
and then resells them for 2,000 a ticket.
Exactly. So you're buying 300. Now there are 700 tickets left. The prices of those tickets all increase because there's less supply.
Yeah. And the demand is still
in turn, the interest, the benefit of those tickets goes down. So now when the Fed is buying up more bond holdings, that's going to increase the price and then in turn lower the the yield. And that's what's happening right now. So I think this is something that the markets itself we're waiting on to see what they're going to do.
I do think that, when they decide to sell or buy some of their holdings, and by the way, they lost a lot of money last year. We just found out the Fed.
They did.
It's 2 straight years. Not as much as the year before, but still losing money. It's more like there's something about changing a rate that people don't even know what that rate is. Like most people do not know what the federal funds rate is. It's not used anymore. Banks don't trade federal funds because of this excess reserve model they have now.
Right.
So I think something about saying the word
suggestion.
cut rates. It's just like, but yeah, how they reinvest or sell their holdings is certainly part of that too. And we'll keep an eye on that. All right, we're overdue for a break. So let's get to our next break, and then we're going to talk.
We were rolling there for a little bit.
We actually have some good news on housing that we're dying to share.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
All right, now we're back, and existing home sales came out last week. And
surprising.
It unexpectedly rose. People were expecting a decline, which would make sense because rates, things that close in February were probably negotiated January, December, when rates were hovering near 7% off and on, but up 4.2% to an annual rate of 4.26 million units. That's actually how they count them, the annual rate.
Yeah.
Economists were looking for a decline to 3.95 million units. So that's good. So if rates were higher, then why do sales go up? Well, inventory is a good place to look. Inventory was up 5.1% in February, 3.5 month supply, up from, it's been hovering around 3 for a while. So 5 months is your neutral. So it's getting a little closer.
Right.
Inventory is actually 17% higher than a year ago. But even with higher inventory, prices are still up almost 4% year over year. So that's still a challenge for buyers. But this is also interesting. All cash sales, 32% of transactions. First-time home buyers, 31% of sales. Now, they say you want that number closer to 40 for a real healthy market. But, we mentioned last week on the show that more single women buy homes than single men. Well, they buy a lot of them because single women are almost a quarter of first-time buyers. So, great job out there, the single ladies buying. That's great.
I do see that too.
Now I was going to ask you this: the mortgages you see, do you see that? Do you really look at first-time home buyers and kind of see who it is and what their situations are? Can you say a lot about that?
We do work with a lot of first-time home buyers. I think within the last year, these statistics aren't surprising to us because we do see a lot of successful single women buying homes. I think there are many factors for that. I think the remote worker, maybe more men are more open to the idea of having remote jobs or being able to work in multiple places, whereas women might want to gravitate more towards a stable job, and that can lead to them buying homes potentially, because a lot of the women that we're working with who are buying homes are highly successful. And we're talking about attorneys.
So I joked last week that men are just too lazy. They don't want a home. That
could be part of it too.
But
yeah.
No, I do know a couple of women that I'm trying to think of single men I know that own homes, and I'm drawing a blank.
By the way, a lot of these women have phenomenal credit scores.
Right.
Like they're just like a lot of the women that were like they're organized, they're making great income, their credit scores are there. Some first-time home buyers, men or women, might be getting help from family, but I don't know. And also, I think men in general just mature later. So I think
that's what we're told all the time. Usually by my wife, she keeps saying, that
yeah.
You want to jump in on this, Lena?
Yeah, we have a resident female in the building.
Yes. I think it could be attributed to multiple factors. One being that women are, we're seeing them get higher levels of education, stay in their careers for longer. Rents are very high right now, so I'm sure they're looking for stability and financial independence. Purchasing a home will allow them to do that and build wealth independently.
That's
well
great.
said.
I'm fired. We're going to have Lena do the show now.
Yeah, pull up a chair.
Maybe next time I'll let you on camera.
Thanks.
We wanted Lena to go on camera. It was just a joke. Don't send hate mail just yet.
We'll take it, though.
Won't want to. Yes, it is. So it is interesting, and it's good news. By the way, mortgage rates ticked up a whopping 2 basis points last week. So we've seen, what is it now, 7 out of the last 9 weeks or whatever, rates have fallen, not by a lot, but I think the stability, you talk about it all the time with rates, knowing that they're not going to shoot up or not having that fear. And you look at what's going on, how consumer spending is slowing. People talking about recessions. We joke about how they become self-fulfilling prophecies. But I think not feeling pressured into doing something, but you need a little bit of pressure, right? But you don't want too much pressure because then people say, wait a minute, I got to step away.
Agreed.
Now, how much pressure do you put on people?
To buy a home?
No, I'm just.
I put a ton. Speaking of pressure, though, with March Madness, we're seeing a lot of these teams under a lot of pressure. And I was thinking, I always try to find ways to tie everything to mortgages.
Okay.
Just to make a comparison. And I was.
Did you hear the subliminal messages when he talks? Get a mortgage. Get a mortgage.
Get a mortgage. Exactly. Is there anything that you see with March Madness that you think relates to what's happening in the economy right now?
Well, I feel there is a sense of urgency, obviously, in one game, lose or go home, to win. And I think if you're buying a home out there and you're going to the process of getting a mortgage, a lot of times you're getting outbid, right?
100%.
So it's like, I got to get this out. I can't, and then if you don't get that one, you go to the next one. I really got to get this one.
And if it's your dream home, you feel like you have one shot. We have one shot to get this home. Let's put our best foot forward. Let's waive the mortgage contingency. Let's waive the appraisal contingency. Let's waive all inspections. And let's go all in on this. And then we don't get it. It's devastating.
And that pain can last a long time.
Correct.
Just like it does if you shoot that poorly and you're a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Exactly.
I love my St. John's. It really energized me. And maybe getting into the market and going through the process of getting pre-qualified will give people more hope. Every step further you get along, you get a little more confident. Now you look back at it and it's like, why was I so panicked about buying a home?
Right.
I love my home. And I think that's, it is the biggest purchase most people will make, right? It's something you're going to put a lot of time and money in. And there's a lot of feeling to get it right, and you want to be prepared, just like you want to be prepared when you get those tournament games. So,
and as an economist who makes predictions and forecasts, when you have everyone filling out a bracket, and the odds of you filling out a complete bracket or picking the correct Final Four, so people are getting a taste of what you need to deal with when they're filling out their brackets.
If you ever see the movie War Games, when they almost have nuclear war because the computer kind of takes over.
I've not seen this movie.
Oh, it's an 80s movie. It's classic.
Sorry, Ray.
There's so many quotes that me and my buddy Vin just call each other and give each other. But right after they narrowly miss having World War III, the computer goes, strange game, the only winning move is not to play. So that's why I don't do brackets. I make predictions here, but how many people actually pay attention to what I don't? I do get in the blog, like I'll get people that'll submit comments and say, I thought you said there was going to be, somebody actually said, I thought you said there was going to be a recession. What happened to that? And my answer is, can you say it's not going to happen?
Right.
We're like, well, we have the soft landing. No, we don't actually, because inflation is still sitting, depending on how you look at it, anywhere from like 2.7 to 3.2.
Yeah. That's
not 2%. And how you get to 2%, as we talked about, Volcker causing a recession is the deal. But look, the advice for the home buyers out there is don't get A-Rod face. Don't get stressed out. You have professionals. Feel more in control and feel informed and prepared.
Yeah.
My son gets nervous for things. I say the way to not be that nervous is to be prepared. You're always going to be nervous. There'd be something wrong with you if you didn't have a big game or a big audition or you're buying a home and you're not a little bit nervous.
There was a great story about Carly Simon and Bruce Springsteen. And before Carly Simon would go on stage, she had a horrible stage fright where she would cancel shows sometimes. She would get very sick. And it would really impact her ability to sing. And Bruce Springsteen had the opposite mindset, where he would feel very nervous before going on stage, still does. But when he feels nervous, it's his body telling his mind that he's ready. So he interprets that nervous feeling as him being ready to go.
I always tell my son when he'd have trumpet auditions, being nervous is God's way of giving you the energy to get through this. And when you hit the first note, or if you're giving a speech, you hit the first point, you need that energy.
Right.
Because if, like, when I gig, if I walked in and was like, oh, what am I playing now? Oh, no, you want to embrace it and just go, yes. That's why a lot of times you start off too loud.
Right.
Because you're too into it.
People don't understand how nervous you get right before coming on the show.
Oh,
yeah. So just, the fact that you're able to perform the way you do is
it's more like, how am I going to stay awake? No, by the way, another legend that had unbelievable stage fright was John Lennon. In fact, the last time he appeared on stage was a bet he lost to Elton John about whatever gets you through the night being a number one hit. So he had to go in Madison Square Garden and play with Elton John, and then literally right when he walked off stage, he threw up.
Wow.
It doesn't surprise me if Springsteen gets it, because you'll never see a better live performer than Springsteen. He really is so much better live. All right, we're going to take one more break, and then we have something pretty interesting, maybe, to discuss, which is, when is the best week this year to list your home? We'll be right back after this message.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
All right, so we tease this. A lot of people say, when's the best time to list a home? And this is a national average. They do actually break this down by market. So this is Realtor.com has determined that April 13th to 19th is the best time to list your home. So why? Well, this is direct quote. The week of April 13th to 19th is expected to have the ideal balance of housing market conditions that favor home sellers more so than any other week of the year. So look at data from 18 to 24, excluding 2020, obviously, to calculate a best time to sell score for each week of the year. So basically, they look at a couple of factors and compare every week to the average week. So there's 5 of them. We'll go through them quickly. Number 1, above average prices. Home prices have typically been 1.1% higher April 13th to 19th to the average week of the year. So that doesn't sound so exciting, but it gets a little more exciting. Next one, above average buyer demand. Historically, listings get 18% more views this week than the average week. So that's big. Quicker market pace. Homes for sale this week typically sell 17% faster than the average week. Number 4, lower competition from other sellers, 13% fewer sellers on the market than the average week, which surprises me because April is spring, and spring has a lot of listings. And final, below average price reductions. 21% fewer homes have price reductions this week versus the average week of the year. Again, the best week for each individual market can vary from the beginning of March to the beginning of May. So check Realtor.com's website to see what your market, what the best week is. But it's interesting. Look, you're always trying to find unique ways to value things in real estate or predict things. Yeah, it's a good effort.
I have a thought on that, though, that I don't think was mentioned is tax day is April 15th.
Right.
So I wonder if once people file their taxes, or at least know what kind of refund they're going to get or how much they owe in taxes, if they're filing on time, if that has any impact on this.
I didn't see that mentioned, but that's a good question. One thing that has no impact on this are mortgage rates because they're not seasonal. But it is a good point. Well, yes, then we'd only have Scott on in the good season, right? No, we'd have him on because we like him that much.
Thank you, Greg.
At least that's what we tell him. We'll see.
The truth comes out.
No, it's always fun to do. So every time I compile this last week in research thing that we put out every week of all stories I think are interesting, and sometimes we have to add things that we wouldn't normally add because we don't have enough to fill the page. This is a week, obviously, and it's been several weeks of very busy things, but I thought this was interesting to discuss because everybody knows the springtime is usually the busy time. Now, we've had a couple of things that have changed that. Having COVID happen in the spring was a big change. Sometimes tax laws can change, and that leads to big rushes in sales. But, there's a little bit of it.
Every little bit helps. If this can give an agent an edge and if they can tell their seller, like, we're being smart about this, here's data that supports why we want to list your property on this specific day or week.
Data is always, I can tell you that if you ask brokers, they'd say, I know when the best place to.
And you know what? They're probably right. They do.
Yeah, they've been doing this long enough. They know. I'd like to convince people I know things, but it's not working so well.
That's why we come back every week to try to convince them.
We'll see. That you can go bet on if Greg's predictions are right. Maybe that's the next step. Anyhow, well, that is the show for this week. Sorry about running a bit longer than we wanted, but it's some good data to digest. And look, it's a scary time anytime things are changing rapidly. There's an article about why markets hate uncertainty, and you think like that's obvious. Why they get all rattled when things, because you want to know the environments of the companies. What's changing that could affect the stocks I hold? Tariffs could be part of that. So there's always that volatility that kicks up anytime there are dramatic changes to tariffs or tax laws or, God forbid, wars or unrest. But again, when do you get certainty? My son was upset after St. John's lost. He didn't go there. By the way,
it's a good son.
We may have an announcement.
He felt your pain.
We may have an announcement to make next week. My son has picked his college.
Wow.
But I said to him,
tease.
He goes, why aren't you more upset? I go, because the vast majority of my life, the only team that's ever won with any regularity is the Yankees that I root for. So I just expect to be unhappy every year, and then I don't get as mad. It's funny because my father, Gregory always say, oh, Dad's mad. Dad's mad. I'm like, I'm not mad. Shut up. But I try. I've learned with sporting events not to get mad because when the Jets haven't won since the year before I was born, the Rangers have won once in 85 years. The Knicks last won when I was 3, and only twice in their existence. And St. John's has never won a national championship in basketball. You got to have some perspective, or you're going to lose all your hair.
But there's still something exciting about coming into every year thinking this could be our year when you've had a drought.
And
for
it
so
could
long.
be early on. You don't realize till
exactly.
later.
So there's some excitement in that. Whereas when you're the Patriots and you're going on their run every year, it's like, hey, if we don't win, this is gonna be terrible.
Well, look, I had a lot of fun. I got to go to a couple of St. John's games, including the Big East Tournament Championship game, which was a blast. So we just enjoy that. Look, there's only one team out of hundreds that can win this thing, or even get into it. There's only 64 teams to get into it. So hopefully they're moving in the right direction. But thank you to Scott Nadler. Thank you to Ray and Lena. Sorry, Lena and Ray. Since you added insight, now you're part of the team. So now you can yell at Ray a little bit. Thanks to all our sponsors, and thanks again to everybody who supports the show. We really enjoy doing it, and we're glad you enjoy watching it. And we will see you next week.